Hi, everyone. So if you're here, you've joined the Birds of a Feather number 2, which is creating GitHub Actions for building and checking bioconductor packages. So this will be led by Mike Smith and Konstantin Altman-Elze. I'm working on my pronunciation, but not too bad. They will start with a short presentation, about 10 minutes, I think, to kind of bring the subject up for those who may not be familiar completely with GitHub Actions, and hopefully trigger some questions from all levels of expertise, obviously. So if you're a newcomer, please do ask more about it. And if you're experienced and you want to use them in a certain way, you're also very welcome. So we will use the Q&A session mostly. Please do not post questions in the chat, but in the Q&A rather. And do raise your hand if you would like to be invited onto the stage. In this case, I think we're going to try to make it as interactive as possible, as a slight difference to the presentations as we had before.
Yes, thanks very much for the intro, Kevin. I hope you guys can see my slides now. Welcome to this Birds of a Feather session. As Kevin said, we're going to have to play it a little bit by ear to see how the format works with AirMeet and things. The idea is hopefully that this is interactive. You guys have suggestions and comments and questions and all that kind of thing. It's not supposed to be just me speaking at you the whole time. So we'll see how that plays with the kind of this platform. But this was the genesis for this kind of thought process. Birds of a Feather thing was a discussion between me and Konstantin after a group meeting where I was describing what I use GitHub Actions for, and we were kind of wondering if there was a motivation or perhaps enough to a groundswell of use of them for there to be kind of a more formal bioconductor set of tools for either teaching people how to use them or to kind of make them easier for people to use in a reproducible fashion. But I kind of realized that maybe not everybody even knows what GitHub Actions are, but they might have come to this session just to get a bit more of a grounding rather than just jump straight in with kind of technical details and things. So we're going to just do a little 10-minute kind of overview of some of the terms and a very brief kind of what I use them for, or at least one particular use case that I have for them. Here we go. So the one use case that I want to kind of focus on in this session, right, is basically trying to emulate the Bioconductor build system. So this is thinking very much as a developer of Bioconductor packages rather than a user. But one of the really cool, powerful features about Bioconductor is that you, once your package is in the build system, and that's both a platform for distributing it to users and things, but also you get approximately nightly, but maybe it's every couple of days, but your package will be built and checked on all three major operating systems. So it runs through all the code, builds the vignettes, and any changes you make will be made available through this. And if it goes wrong, so if either you've made a mistake or somebody's package that you rely on changes the way it works, you get informed pretty quickly. So within a couple of days, basically, that it's no longer building. So this is just an example for one of the packages I look for. And you can see that, for instance, this package was failing for a while on Mac OS. And I don't have a Mac machine, so this is very helpful to me to find out that something was going wrong with it. But it does take several days between me making a change and getting the results from this, which isn't very useful if I get it wrong and I have to wait 2 more days with my fix before I see if the refix has then worked, kind of thing. So it can be a bit of a slow, not interactive process. And I guess the other end of the spectrum that I have, so when I get asked a question by a user who has an operating system I don't have, is that I make a virtual machine that tries to mirror what they have, and I set this up and I try to basically emulate their computer and figure out the problem and then figure out a solution to it. So this is kind of super interactive, but in no way automated, right? It takes me a long time to build the machine. I've solved the problem, and then I probably switch it off until that user contacts me again with a new problem. So it's very interactive, and I get a response immediately in the end, but I never run it again until prompted, kind of thing. And so GitHub Actions, I am using them to try and kind of bridge this gap. So in this particular context, I'm using them to provide another option for package testing. And essentially they're cloud-based workflows. So I describe what I want to do, which in this case is running the various steps for checking an R package. And they give me an output at some point telling me whether it's still working or whether the changes I've made have failed or introduced a problem, kind of thing. And I should at this point say that other continuous integration, so that's what this process is called, this kind of regular checking of software. Other tools do exist, and many of them are very good, but I quite like the fact that GitHub Actions are tied very closely with GitHub, and the reason that's kind of useful here is that actually, in order to get your package into Bioconductor, you have to have it on GitHub just before that initial submission. So basically every user at some point will have their package on GitHub before it becomes a Bioconductor package. And many of us continue to maintain kind of developmental things on there, as well as having the version that's available through Bioconductor. So that's my kind of focus here. And then I just wanted to kind of describe the anatomy of a workflow. So as I said, the workflow is the sort of things that you want to do. And this is just a little bit of the terminology that's used in GitHub Actions in particular. So the kind of smallest building block, these are actions, or sometimes you could just call them, just think of them as commands, right? So it's each thing that you need to do in your workflow. And so, for instance, in this kind of context of checking a package, that might be finding the dependencies of your package. It might then be installing those packages and then running the R command check routines. And each one of those is a separate kind of step that you need to build up to make your workflow. And actually, the reason I've called them actions or commands is that sometimes they are essentially what you would write directly in a terminal kind of thing. So this is just a straight copy out of one of my workflows. But you can see this run line here is something that might look very familiar, right? This is standard R code, we're passing it to R script. It's just a command. If you typed it in at the terminal, it would also work. But there are slightly more involved. So instead of commands, these are actions, right? This is where the name of GitHub Actions really comes from. And instead of a command that we've typed in here, somebody, whoever owns, this is a link to a GitHub repository. This is the master branch of that repository, and basically it's the organization rlib. They have actually gone to the effort of writing a whole set of routines for, in this case, setting up R. So that goes off, it downloads R, it installs it in your virtual machine. It does a lot of work in the background, but in your workflow, all you need to do is write this 1 or 2 lines giving a little bit of details about it. So this is, you can either have these commands, which are really small units, or somebody has written an action. But in the case of your workflow, this is still kind of the building blocks of it. And the reason I wanted to introduce this is it's one of the kind of talking points I'd like to come to later on, is this kind of distinction between the two there. But then if we just kind of rattle through the rest of the terminology, that's really the building blocks. But essentially, the next level up from actions are steps, which basically link together a set of related commands or actions. To be honest, I think the line blurs here. Maybe there is a formal line, but I find it quite difficult to determine what should be a step and what is just a series of individual actions. But that's the next level in this hierarchy. And then maybe more importantly, above steps are the idea of jobs. So these are basically, you combine all your steps together, or a bunch of steps together, and that is a job. And each one of those jobs can run independently. So the steps run linearly through, but jobs are a collection, and you can run them either one after the other or simultaneously. And so probably in this case, the obvious use case here is that this is running the same thing, so checking our package, but on different operating systems. And they are completely independent. They can be run as separate jobs. And then this collection of jobs, that is your whole workflow. So it's one file that describes what steps you're going to take and how those jobs work independently from one another. And that's the workflow. So when we describe a GitHub Actions workflow, it's this kind of hierarchical description of the steps you need to carry through. And there's actually two more bits of definition that you need, and then basically you've got the entire syntax of how these things are structured. And so these are what they call the runner, which essentially is the machine that the job is actually being carried out on. So that's at the job level. And so this basically represents, is it a Windows machine? Is it a Linux machine? What version of Linux is it running? That kind of thing. But this is what allows us to run independent operating systems and that kind of thing. And then the event is whatever triggers the workflow to happen. So That could be a particular day of the week or a certain time period since it was last run, or it could be every time you make a change to your GitHub repository. And it's these two things at the top which really allow us to actually get the entire build system from Bioconductor ourselves in GitHub. So we can run on all three major operating systems. In fact, we can run it many more times than that. And we can do it every time we make a change. So this is bridging this gap, right? We've got this virtual machine kind of thing, but we're getting it not at a 2-day delay. We're getting the results in maybe 10 to 15 minutes, depending upon how long it takes to check your package. And so if you wanted to actually go about doing this yourself, how would you do it? If you've never tried before, essentially what you have to do is put a specially formatted YAML file. So this, I've called it R command check. It could be called whatever you wanted. The important thing is that it would go in this folder in your GitHub repository. And this YAML file is the workflow description. It tells it when it should be run, what those job steps are, and those little copy-pasted bits, they were straight from a YAML file in one of my examples. But how do you know what actually should go in there to check your package? How would you go about writing it? It's all very well saying that's where you should put it. And essentially, all I ever do is copy either somebody else or I copy myself. So I go and find one in somebody else's repository, copy it into my one, and then make a few tweaks and hope that's good enough. And actually, I should give a shout out to the BioC this package, which was only pointed out to me in the last couple of days. But there's actually a function in there for creating your own GitHub action template, which is probably better than going off and just trying to find one randomly in another GitHub repository and copying and pasting it. So that probably should be a starting point for people who want to create this themselves. And just to kind of show you what you get if you haven't, if you've implemented this in your GitHub action, in your GitHub account and things, this is basically a screenshot from the Biomart package where every time, this is the Actions tab, every time I submitted something that didn't work, I get an X next to it, and I also get an email telling me it failed, because you can see it takes about 20 minutes in this case to run through, and then when it finally passed, I got a nice tick. And so every time I make a change, this gets run just like you would hope with the Bioconductor build system. And just to kind of demonstrate that sometimes this is useful, I'm not just making extra work and things. Here's one example where I made a change and it threw an error. You can see that actually I run this on several operating systems with different versions, in brackets is different versions of R. And actually, when this happened, I suddenly saw there was a problem in R 3.6 that doesn't occur in the newest R. This was super helpful to me. This basically found the mistake, and this is the error message that came out. It allowed me to diagnose that about 2 days before I got the first email from a user telling me that Biomart had broken on their machine. And so I was ahead of the curve and could answer their query and things because I knew what the solution was. And so this is just kind of showing that actually this was really helpful to me. And this doesn't get run on the Bioconductor build system. They aren't necessarily using the old version of R to test this, but users definitely are. And so that's kind of a very brief whistle-stop tour through some of the terminology and one little use case of GitHub Actions. This slide hopefully will stay up and motivate some of the discussion in this. But I guess I'm happy to discuss all sorts of topics about this. I think both other guys on the panel are also keen for this to be interactive, and you as the audience should bring up things. But really, I'm interested in knowing whether other people are using GitHub Action workflows and things. And if you are, do you think there are bottlenecks to how you're doing that? Are you repeating code and getting one out of sync with another, copy-paste mistakes, that kind of thing? Does that matter? Or are you happy with the kind of state of things? Also, are there strong opinions on having kind of GitHub-specific things in an R package, which is supposed to be platform agnostic? And I haven't thought too much about that. And then if people are using them, but they think, or are interested in using them, but think there are hurdles to that, is there merit and enthusiasm for us as a community to kind of develop Bioconductor-specific actions? So, for instance, I showed that one which was about setting up R, and that boiled down all of the work that goes into that into one command. Could we have a setup Bioconductor, or is that too universal and perhaps it should be more granular and that kind of thing? So I'd love to kind of get people's opinions on what might be a universal step, what would need to be user configurable and whether people think that's worthwhile. And if you don't think it's worthwhile, would it be more useful just to have some documentation somewhere on the Bioconductor website rather than scrabbling around trying to find an example that might be helpful to you? I guess I would like to open the floor. I can't see, Konstantin, have you made a
poll? Well, I have already tried to play a bit around with the question feature and messed up the first question, so I posted one without any text, so that sparked some discussion. I'm sorry about that. And then I also posted a proper one, which was asking if people are already using GitHub Actions, and it actually seems to be. I can't see how many people have voted. 46% of the people who have answered say they are using GitHub Actions so far. So it seems to be quick split.
So I also cannot tell you how many people have answered, but I actually looked into the Bioconductor code base to see how many examples of the .github/workflows folder existed. And this morning there was 149 examples. So 149 packages have that folder structure in there. So that's, what did Martin say, about 2,000 packages in total. So it's not quite 10%, but there's quite a few people, or at least quite a few packages. But it could be that there's only 5 developers who are doing it in all of their packages. But that's quite interesting when he answered the poll, but a reasonable number, 50-50 between. Can you ask who would be interested in using them but hasn't?
Sure.
I'll try and feed that back to the platform of AirMeet, that it's not just a proportion, but also the numbers that are shown.
And I guess if people would like to, those that do or those that don't and think there's a bottleneck, would you like to kind of raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone to you essentially, and then you can speak too.
Okay, so I've now posted the question. Unfortunately, the text field is quite limited, so I ran out of characters, but I think it should be readable. And there are also 2 questions in the Q&A tab. I'm not sure if you want to take them now going along, or...
I'll have a look at those. Kevin, can you...
I just noticed that actually Levi, who posted one of the questions, also has the hand raised, so we can actually invite him on stage. And
yep.
There we go. So yeah, and for other people as well. So if you want to post your question first as a Q&A while someone is on stage, and then whenever we'll pass you the microphone next, so we can have text-based and vocal questions in parallel. Go ahead, Levi.
All right. I thought I might as well just try raising my hand and asking in person. One of the big questions I have is how well do multi-platform checks work? And then ultimately, how far away do you think we are from being able to move build systems over to GitHub Actions? So first question, I guess, is easier. Like, I'd like to check my package on all 3 platforms. And then the second one being, the bigger one is, could Bioconductor conceivably do that?
I feel like I've been doing all the... You have to go first, Konstantin. I've been doing all the talking up to this point.
Okay, so I think it's working quite nicely across different platforms. One thing I've observed with some package of mine that uses compiled code is that it does randomly break from time to time on some platforms. So sometimes like it just doesn't work on Windows, and that's not necessarily even that I introduced some bug, but it might be just that something upstream of my package, some dependency, isn't working anymore. So for me, the challenge right now is that my build scripts seem to be quite fiddly, and I sometimes just seem to ignore if I get a red X on a commit. Sometimes I still check, but if it's like only like 1 out of 5 which broke, I probably assume it's a random error. But if of course it's consistent in the same platform, I will then dig deeper, and that's quite nice that I do have the full history. So I like that.
Do you run into challenges with things like dependencies on the multiple platforms, like systems dependencies?
Yes, that does happen. That sometimes, like if I need some library and it just doesn't work, I think I was recently struggling with libcurl, and I had no idea what was going on. I was just randomly trying, like the same way you would do it on a server. just that it now always takes 10 minutes until you can run one iteration. So it can be a bit frustrating, and that's also why we were thinking about if it might be worth establishing a proper resource similar to the ones that RStudio are providing, specifically for Bioconductor, which could be coupled, for example, to the Docker images which are already available.
And
yeah, I guess one thing I would add is that I would say there were maybe 3 times as many commits where I'm fixing the action as where I'm fixing the R code. Because it's always it's either because I don't understand how the action syntax works, or it's because I don't know what I need to install on a Mac. And so I'm finding something and then copying, pasting it into my action, waiting for it to run, and then failing, and then finding that I still need another system dependency. Whereas, as Konstantin says, the Docker images are really great for getting it working on Linux. But it's definitely a bit of a headache, and I suppose that's one of the things where maybe if we know the universal things to install on Linux, maybe we also would have a good idea of the things that what you would need to install on a Mac to get 95% of Bioconductor packages building on that platform as well, or something like that. And maybe that would be useful for making this easier for other developers to maintain.
Might be an interesting BioC challenge at some point to start testing, checking Bioconductor packages in high throughput on GitHub Actions or on the GitHub runner, a local GitHub runner.
Yeah, that was your second part of the question. If Bioconductor, I guess, could transition to such a system, I think it would be great because you get the more immediate feedback. So for me, already a day can be a long time. Like I already have half forgotten how I now fixed this bug. And like after 20 minutes, I might still remember. But I guess that's more like that's something where the R core, the Bioconductor core, would have to chime in. I think none of them, as far as I could tell, are right now in this Birds of the Feather session. But I guess we will probably like using also tools like the BioC use this or BioC this package could already start something like from the community side.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great. So we have other questions, which in the meantime, some of them got upvoted a bit more, but I sort of promised the microphone to Antonio, who had a nice question. So I'll pass him to him. And after that, I'll try and go through the upvoted questions. There we go.
Okay. Hi. Sorry to cut the line.
No, it's great. We're trying to make it interactive.
So actually, it's good to know that you're struggling with not good, but good to know that you're struggling with the GitHub Actions, because at some point I've set it up on GitLab, get some GitLab runners, and I also was trying to fix the runner, not the code, all the time, and I still don't know what I did. But anyway, so my question is basically if there is already some sort of documentation for developers in the Bioconductor website. I assume not. But that would be something I'd like to ask.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, there is no formal Bioconductor endorsed documentation for this. I think there's a few blog posts, I think, by Leonardo Collado Torres, who's the author of the BioC this package, about how he uses it. Yeah, I don't think there's anything kind of, and maybe that's sufficient. If that's really what people would like, is just kind of some more helpful instructions. Obviously, I guess we would need to talk to some members of the core team about whether they really want to support this. As I said, one of my points was really, do they actually have a problem with us filling up their Bioconductor Git repository with these YAML files that do things on a completely different platform? I would hope not, but maybe that is all that's required. It's some more formal documentation. But as far as I'm aware, there's nothing that's kind of out there, and which is why I kind of just copy them
And just a follow-up question, I think you sort of answered it, or actually Konstantin answered it, because there seems to be no Docker. You can't download Docker and then run just a Docker image with all the R packages that you need. Is that correct in the runners, in the action? Sorry, or because in GitLab you can do that. You can just say, well, I want to start. The first thing you do is download.
You can start from Docker image. No, you can. But you would, of course, want to have the latest update. So I'm not sure. And of course, would only apply to Linux and Mac, maybe. And Windows then, wouldn't work as easily. But no, you can make your GitHub action depend on some Bioconductor, some Docker image. Interesting link, which I might want to highlight, and is that there's a repository by Sean Davids called Bioconductor Actions already, which we seem to have missed. I quickly looked at the code, and it seems to be that about a year ago, he and Vince Carey seem to have started things going into this direction. I wasn't aware of this, so this is very interesting and perfect. I think this is really great to see such things during the Birth of a Feather, and might also highlight that we want to maybe do a better job in the community to aggregate or highlight such available resources already, because I think many people are using this now in parallel and everybody's learning it by themselves and just copying code, I guess, mainly.
So yeah, I don't know if it's the time for the shameless plug on Bioconductor Challenges, but maybe something more of your sites could help. There is, I can't remember, for developers, there's a developer section of the Bioconductor website which hosts already a lot of material. So another link might actually get a bit unnoticed, but it should definitely be the central place, I guess. But yeah, if we can have a thematic sort of classification of challenges like this and storing the Bioconductor challenge, I'm all ears. But before I give, I want to pass it to Hector, who posted a question, which I think is the most upvoted one as well. So Antonio, I'm just gonna push you off the stage and pass the microphone to Hector. There can only be one person on stage.
Hi, thank you. I think like people I've talked, I spent like 3-4 times the bug is from the GitHub action I've actually changed. And I've been having trouble Googling around what's happening because it's a big mix of like R code, GitHub actions, updated and breaking everything down. I know what I've done for my sanity is to several YAML, especially with Docker a bit and the Bioconductor Docker usually breaks it because of someone else. And so that's one in a different file, so I don't get an email saying something is broken with your package when it's not me like for it. But yeah, I don't know if I need to get some...
So what alternative Docker image are you using then as a base image, if not the Bioconductor Devil?
I think there's 2 you can get. Maybe I'm mistaken. Actually, no, sorry. I'm only using Docker image, the Bioconductor Devil, but also I'm using non-Docker images. So like R and the Bioconductor stable releases.
Yeah,
my go-to.
I think so. I haven't thought. I guess you still commit if only one of them is right. I find it looks so bad if only because one of them failed.
I think you do get the X, but on the README you can put a different vignette, like a different box for the different actions. So at least that one is green.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a good answer for debugging them either. I generally find it where whilst it's instantaneous feedback relative to the build system, it's still maybe 15 minutes before it inevitably gets to the bit where it fails, because at least it checks the YAML syntax instantly, because often it's because I've put one extra blank line in and not a bar to tell it that I'm putting a blank line in, that kind of thing. At least it tells you that straight away. But yeah, most of the time it's just, and I suppose like most things to do with programming, the quicker you at least understand where it came from. It's just like learning how to use R. Which isn't a very helpful, but it is the truth, I think, is that I've got better at anticipating where they're going wrong and also recognizing the error messages it throws because I've done it before, which at least makes it less frustrating, if not more efficient.
Speed, and Levi also mentioned something, but I once actually, as part of debugging, I suspected that my workflow was maybe running out of memory. It was working on my laptop and crashing on the GitHub action, and I contacted them explicitly asking GitHub Actions, and they don't have, what they said is they don't have tools that let you monitor resource usage during a run, but you can enable debug logging to get a more verbose output. So I think typically what people do is they run them and they work from that to try and use their best guess. No really silver bullet for that at the moment. And yeah, Levi mentioned apparently there is a GitHub, something to run GitHub Action locally. Okay, so I will sort the question unanswered by do we have any raised hand? So is it Francesca? I don't know. There's no O or A. Francesca Cataramol. No, that's the Sean Davy. Sorry. It keeps sorting them differently. Is it a good practice to use caches on GitHub Action for R packages? That would be the next upvoted question. Who wants to take it?
I don't know whether I think of it as good practice or not. So I don't have it turned on. And I thought I did until I looked at some when I was writing this talk and realized I'd actually taken it out for a few packages. And I guess for most of the time, it doesn't actually take that long to install the packages. And particularly if you can get the binary Linux versions of the packages and things, so then it's normally a couple of minutes, and I would rather get them fresh every time. It's not my bandwidth, it's GitHub's bandwidth or whoever's cloud hosting provider's bandwidth. So I would rather do that and not have the risk of kind of having things that are now outdated or something along those lines, particularly because I actually find the logic behind how most of the caching examples work in the kind of examples you can get from the RStudio sort of workflows and things, a little bit confusing, where you take a hash of the dependency packages, like you get a data frame with the names and versions and whether you've got them installed, and then you hash it and you save it as an RDS file, and then you put that onto the like MD5 hash of that onto the cache name or something. I find it really confusing, whereas if I just have one line which says find me the dependencies, install the dependencies, I'm kind of happy with that. So for me, I tend not to have the caching. The only other example I have is one where I actually build a really big book that has hundreds of packages in it, in which case it takes hours to install them all, and I definitely cache them then. But that's like a very different type of workflow. It's not just checking a package. I don't know if that's the same for you, Konstantin.
Well, I actually do use the caching, but I'm always a bit suspicious if something breaks that it might be due to the cache, and I would love to have some way to actually just delete the cache, like clean it out, and then it starts fresh for the next time I commit it, so I could easily check that. But as far as I read online, there's no easy way to do this. So what you have to do is to rename it and then remember to update all the things downstream, where you might rely on that name and that might then break again things. So if the question is it best practice? Not sure. As Mike said, if you have a lot of dependencies, so sometimes I have a lot of suggested packages for the vignette. I like having them, especially if you haven't properly set up the binary packages for Linux, for example. So it does do the whole compilation step, which can take quite a while. But yeah, I do see the downsides.
Yeah, I would say actually the other use case where that has been really useful, which is kind of tangential a bit to this, is that we had some questions about building the packages on non-x86 architecture. So basically, can we build it for an ARM processor? And there is not a binary repository of Linux packages for that and things, and you have to use an emulator to do it. So you're building from source and it's going through an emulator. It's really quite slow. And so I managed to set up a workflow which did that, but it takes at least an hour to install the packages for a relatively small number of packages. And so actually turning on the cache for that was useful. But if you look at my commits for that particular workflow, you'll see there are many of them, and they sometimes have version bumps in the cache name just for exactly this thing that Konstantin talked about, where you kind of just want to delete it and make it try again. But you can't do that, so you just have to keep, I have a V1, V2, V3 kind of thing, and it keeps incrementing up just to start afresh.
Okay, so that's, yeah, I'll just mention actually having helped a few of our workshop speakers this week debug the GitHub action to deploy the workflow. We did just run into an issue that was solved by actually busting the cache. So the workshop were sort of crashing for no reason related to R or to the container that the runner that they were running. It was literally the cache interacting with itself in a horrible way, and so the solution was simply to essentially refresh the cache. So there are pros and cons. It does cut down the runtime, but it can actually lead to unexpected errors that are just like unrelated to your code, to whatever is in your repository. And to work around that, I also actually personally use the renv package, RENV. So sometimes I actually define locally the package that I want, and then I pass that list of package to the runner, and I install the safe version. The caveat with that is that it won't install new version of the packages unless I tell it to. So it's the counter. Well, it's the extreme version of the cache, I would say. All right, unanswered. What do we have? What's a good resource for debugging GitHub action? We did. Is it already? Okay, I've got one question. All right, I'll just cover mine. So I don't know if anyone, I think Hector might have mentioned that, right? I was curious whether anyone actually set up a local runner, because so GitHub offers a bunch of runners so that everything runs in the cloud. But I've seen in documentation, I didn't spend the time doing it myself, but apparently you can set up a computer yourself that every time you push to GitHub, that computer runs the GitHub action, so you don't enter the GitHub queue, but it's actually based on your resources. I'm curious if anyone on the call actually did that, or if everyone is relying on GitHub Cloud to essentially run the action for you.
Well, I think it's a super interesting question. So I haven't done it myself, but I thought about the problem, because we have now seen for Travis that it might not be sustainable to just give it out for free forever. So it might be that at some point GitHub will actually charge money for that, and then you don't want to be locked in to their systems. And it would be cool if you could just have, for example, our institute, which have enough server capacity, be able to set this up, and then you would just add maybe a line, so it would be running at Emble. But yeah, if somebody has any experience with this, that would make me even more comfortable actually using GitHub Actions, because then I would know there's a way out and I wouldn't be locked in and would then need to change provider.
Yeah, I definitely feel like Microsoft have actually made a really cool service that I use a lot. And now I'm just waiting for the day where they turn around and start charging me for it. And I'm a little bit torn between, should I embrace this thing that I'm fairly certain at some point is going to become expensive? But I just find it really useful. So yeah, and the effort, I suppose, in setting things up is one of the hurdles I wanted to avoid, right? They've got all the hardware. All I do is write this YAML file, and it goes off onto all these three different platforms, right? I haven't had to configure. That's what I do in my virtual machine, right? Is that I configure my own Mac. It's not a GitHub Actions runner, but essentially I've done all the work to build this machine to run things. And I don't think that's sustainable necessarily with the whole matrix of different versions of R that you also might want to run, and different versions of packages and that kind of thing.
It's back to Hector. Do you have a good example of semi-exotic GitHub action you use as inspiration?
Well, so I saw the question, I checked. So I actually use, Kevin, your script as a basis for my package. I'm not sure from when it is, but I think I saw it at some point from one of your packages, and then copied that and adapted it.
Okay. Okay, I probably stole it from. I definitely stole it from someone else. And yeah, if you're talking about exotic, I actually did write quite a few different GitHub actions. I've got one to compile my Jaringan slides, so that the Jaringan is this package that allows you to write slides in R Markdown and compile them in PDF and HTML. And I get lazy compiling them locally, so every time I push my RMD to GitHub, it actually compiles the slide and pushes them to GitHub Pages. So that's how I gave my presentation about BioC challenges this morning. I also wrote one for a book, so the IC book, which again is R Markdown based, but requires a bit of fine touch because you compile a PDF, an HTML, and EPUB book, and a GitHub book. So all those things actually are there's variation on a theme, I would say. I don't know if you guys have more example. What else did I do? I borrowed from Luke Zappia, actually. He's got a series of R notebooks to do Twitter coverages of conferences. And I've also automated that. So right now it's running for your BioC on a cron job. Actually, oh, that's the one that I've linked in the feed, actually, right? Yeah. And you can see at the top, Mike touched on the subject, actually, that you can run it on a schedule rather than just on a push to your repository. I don't know about others. Exotic.
Yeah, so just touching on that point about running them regularly, I guess one of the this will also link into there's a question from Alan O'Callaghan about is it common to find mismatches between like the output you get from the Bioconductor build system and your own? I don't tend to find too many differences between them, but I guess one of the big differences is that actually normally the GitHub one you only get a report when you submit a change, whereas the build system is every day, unless you set up GitHub to build it more frequently, even when you haven't made a change. So sometimes it's not a change you've made at all. I guess the example I showed where it didn't work in version 3.6 was actually a change in dplyr, which changed one of the hub packages. BioC file cache, which changed biomart, which threw an error in old versions of R. I guess I didn't make any changes to my package, so it wasn't necessarily being run on GitHub. I just happened to submit something at the right time to catch that. But it was built every day on the Bioconductor one, so you kind of got that advantage. But you can turn that on in GitHub Actions. One of the reasons you can sometimes get different things is they don't install all the packages fresh on the Bioconductor build system. So if a package is in CRAN, gets installed, then gets, for instance, taken out of CRAN, which has happened quite a lot recently, that can make your package break for users who are new and try and install a dependency that doesn't exist, but it carries on fine on the Bioconductor build system because that package was installed and then isn't removed until basically the next release of Bioconductor comes around. So that is one example. I can't remember. There are some on the build list. I can't remember which packages that was for, but I remember encountering that a couple of weeks ago where it was failing for a user but building fine on the Bioconductor system. So that's one place where they can get out of sync with each other.
One more thing it reminds me as well is the scheduled jobs on GitHub Action, actually. I got an email at some point because I was getting used to it and I set up the schedule for a bunch of repository. Suddenly I was getting a series of emails from GitHub Action a few weeks later telling me that scheduled workflows are disabled automatically after 60 days of repository inactivity. So if you don't regularly commit to a repository, GitHub will turn off the automated GitHub action. And yeah, so you're only one commit away every 60 days, but it is something to bear in mind.
That I did not know. That's good to know.
Yeah, and I think oh no, you just covered Alan's question, mismatches. So yeah, that's, I don't know exactly all the internals of the Bioconductor build system, but it is a possibility that it's not necessarily, if it doesn't happen at the same time as the GitHub repository, the GitHub push, you might miss things. Right, okay. There's something in the feed. You can, Alan said that you can set up a cron job to maintain.
I think it was so
that
you could just make a cron job on your computer to make a commit every 60 days.
Right.
So then you can get GitHub Actions going.
I guess you can even set I mean, an action can commit back to the repository it's in, right? So it can just keep itself alive by every 30 days making a new commit to the README or something.
Yeah, you can try. I don't know how many safeties they've put in place.
Yeah, maybe we aren't cleverer than the GitHub engineers, but sometimes when I'm struggling with their syntax, maybe I think we are, but there we go.
All right, 30 people. Everyone seems to be still alive and well. I've marked the questions unanswered as answered. So yeah, anyway, so I don't know, I'll just take the chance to say if you guys want to put a BIOC challenge about GitHub Actions. So at some point I did write a very simple one and then I removed it because I saw that there was BIOC this already covering part of it, and I thought it would be good to have the discussion at the bird of a feather, essentially which direction you guys maybe want to take it. From my experience with the Bioconductor, I was thinking that actually it's not just one action to rule them all, right? We might actually want to have one action for testing, checking the package, another one maybe not everyone wants to deploy the package down. I mean, it's always a nice add-on.
Yeah, I guess we haven't really necessarily addressed much on the second bullet point on here. It sounds like there's a reasonable number of people using them, and we all kind of have some common ground in the things that could be frustrating or that aren't. But I guess nobody's really said, my life would be so much better if you made a setup bioconductor action, right? So maybe we should see if anybody actually thinks that is worth spending time. Like, I think it would be nice, but how much of my time do I want to dedicate to it?
Question so that people can vote that this would make their life great, and then probably everybody would click yes because somebody else does such work.
As long as we can then screenshot it and show it to our funding bodies that it's actually justified, then that, yeah.
I do agree with the third point, right? The documentation. So we had a question a bit earlier about that the documentation is still very much on GitHub, and I think requires a lot of reading and experimentation to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And it's really, in my experience, it's learning from experience, knowing, getting a sense for how actions interact with each other. But I don't know if having maybe some BIOC-centric documentation saying, okay, I don't know, the checkout action, the essential steps, and then maybe the extra steps, the one that push the build a Docker container and push it. Because, yeah, I think from the workshop I've seen also that even people who are experienced, let's say, with Bioconductor or R in general, GitHub Action is an entire new world, right? So you're not familiar with GitHub Action because you're a bioinformatician. It's an extra learning curve. So maybe facilitating that, I don't know whose responsibility really is or who wants to take up the challenge, but I thought that could help.
Yeah, I suppose one thing is actually how you make people realize that it's there. I can't remember who it was that said, it might have been you, Kevin, that there is a developer section on the website, but there's a lot of text, and it's not necessarily easy to notice that a new part has been added to that. But I suppose that's really there's an advertising problem, but we need the content behind it before we advertise the resource. But if people think it would be useful, then and that's probably in some ways more straightforward than writing a new action, although I always think it's more fun to write code than to write documentation. I don't know if everybody agrees, but we have also heard that many of the reasons that Bioconductor packages and things are successful is because they have good documentation and good vignettes, and I can't argue with that. I think that's a really key point to why some things are successful. So maybe that would be a sufficient first step, and we can think about that in designing the challenge kind of thing.
Yes, so I did. Sorry, I just quickly reporting on the vote. So right now, 89%. No, the other way around. 89% are in favor that it would make their life easier if there were GitHub Action, Bioconductor with GitHub Actions. So, Mike, can you convince now your funding?
89% is pretty good. Yeah. I'm quite happy with that.
We can get up to 90 now.
Is it? presumably that means that's a reasonable number of people must have answered it as well, for it to not just be a nice round 10 or 5. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so there was just I think it's more of a side note. Is it really possible to commit with GitHub Action back to the repo? Because the experience with GitLab CI/CD is that it's not that straightforward. I tend to agree with that because I know that the checkout action has changed between version 1 and 2. And I think one of them was only sort of making a non-Git copy, was sort of making a download of the folder of the current state of the Git repository, but without the actual .git folder. And so you wouldn't have the information to push back to that repository. I think there was a bit of a safety mechanism, not making a clone of the repository, but just snatching the content of it, like downloading a zip file of the current content. So it might not be possible to push, but yeah, it's more of a side note. I don't think it's really. We were talking about hacking the system there. And Hector mentioned community portfolio might be nice. So yeah.
Can I just I'll just drag a.
Yeah.
This is from a different repository called FitFileR, which is not. It's an R package, but it's not in Bioconductor. It's to do with reading sports watches, the data that comes out of them. But this commit is the render action, right? And so there's a workflow that builds a package down and updates the README and recommits this back to the. So I didn't make this commit. These ones are all me, and then this one happens every time. Yep. There's an actual push to the repository, and I think it's another step, but it's relatively straightforward. I don't know how many lines it is, 5 or something. It kind of sets up Git, makes the changes, and then if there's been a change, it pushes it back to the master branch. But yeah, so just as a kind of example that it is definitely possible, and you can probably do more interesting things than just update the README.
Yeah, well, it is possible. I mean, there are actions that push to the GitHub Pages branch. So yeah, so it's going to be possible.
Just a quick question about the question from Hector. So what is exactly a community portfolio? Something like the GitHub, the ggplot extension webpage, or what do you mean by that?
The action, the rlib actions stuff. But hang on, I'm going to hand the mic. There we go.
All right. Thank you. My idea was kind of just a place where we can share GitHub Actions. Kind of like if I want to try to do something new, and this is the first place I would go to look at because I know where, like, this is what people use in their Bioconductor packages, or something like that.
I think it's a cool idea, and I think if you had a website like the ggplot extensions, where people can have a short description, then a link to the source, and then, yeah, just have a page with like 15 examples or whatever, could already be quite helpful. And could also be updated by people voting or whatever, what was now most useful.
Yeah, so Kevin just put something on the chat. I think it's exactly what I had in mind, but just specifically for Bioconductor. So it's not as overwhelming as this enormous thing.
So yeah, I saw the BioC action at the time. I haven't really followed it recently, but I think that was the effort at the time. It would be nice to see where it's at. And we've got a couple of minutes left. Oh, is there another raised hand? Oh, there's Levi.
I just wanted to add that in addition to like thinking about the Bioconductor users as a target, I think you could think about the Bioconductor core team and associated people as a target as well, of people who could benefit from some of this work. And just I'm just thinking back to a little over a year ago. I went about just trying to take a base R container and see which Bioconductor packages could be tested on it. And I just ran a loop to try installing all packages and seeing which ones it failed and which ones it passed on, and then started adding dependencies to that container to see how close to 100% of packages I could get to. And that was kind of the inspiration for the Bioconductor Docker container. And then the core team took it over and got it much closer to 100%. But just that sort of proof of concept of showing how something could be done, and a repo that they can take and develop from, I feel like could be really valuable. I know that there's recognition that there are a lot of advantages to building packages on infrastructure as code instead of physical infrastructure, and that it would make the whole package building system more robust, less sensitive to a disaster at this one location, more accessible to everyone. But I really feel like it's a hard thing to get off the ground because it's kind of daunting. So it's something where a jolt from the community that shows, it's possible. Like here's something where we tried it, say, trying to extend it to the other platforms as well, and seeing where the bottlenecks are, and initiating this effort could be really helpful to the organization.
Yeah, thanks for that, Levi. I guess this has been a motivating enough hour for I think to definitely spend some more time looking into it. Right, there has been enthusiasm. We've had 30 people for the full hour. That's been really cool. You're always a bit worried there's going to be the three of us in an echo chamber because everybody's interested in spatial transcriptomics or whatever the other Birds of a Feather session was. So yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely spend some time, maybe more rigorously formalizing a few steps perhaps into the kind of BIOC challenge framework, just because it's kind of there, and it will help certainly me, but I guess certainly Konstantin as well, to distill a few thoughts into what might be achievable, especially having got a bit of feedback about what people might want. But yeah, I guess if ultimately if the BIOC core team took over something that we created, that would also be pretty cool.
All right, thanks, Levi. And so just looking at the last two Q&A, so I think, we've got a bit of extended time beyond, but I don't necessarily want to assume that everyone wants to stay forever. So there is, Sudeep is asking if you can also post, Mike, can you post the link to the GitHub repo you showed into the feed? I can't remember which GitHub repository you showed, but
it's the most. There's a link in the most recent. The most recent post in there is from me with a link to that's the package down website, but there's a link from that to the GitHub repo that's behind it.
Okay, brilliant. And then David Zhang mentioned, so I have used and found the package BioCDs. The BioCDs package as a great entry point to GitHub Action. So are there ideas, plans about whether BioCDs will be built upon or become part of BioC Action in the future? So BioCD, that's Leo, right? Is handling that, or who else?
Yeah. It's. I think it's principally Leo. And to be honest, we hadn't really found it or seen it or thought about it much until a few days ago. So it could be that with sort of a bit more looking, he's already done it. Essentially, though, at the moment, I think there's a terminology point here, which is what is a workflow and what is an action, right? And kind of set up R in the rlib repository is an action, but your workflow uses many actions to get there. And BioC this creates a template workflow for you, which has many steps in it to do with installing packages and setting up R and pandoc. And so it uses actions from the rlib guys, and then also steps that he has kind of, I guess, hard-coded into the template. And then once you've kind of created something from the template, you can then edit it to be more specific for your project. And I guess maybe we're sort of proposing to simplify down some of those steps into, if there's many steps to get a working Bioconductor installation, so you have to install BioC Manager, and maybe you want BioC style, and you're going to want the BioC check before submission, and all these, each of those might be a separate step. especially if I don't know whether the installers work necessarily well. The kind of ones from rlib, do they look in the Bioconductor repository? I can't remember. So maybe we want an action that says set up Bioconductor, and it takes an argument that says developmental or release version or something like that, and it does a bunch of those steps for you, and then Leo's package could just put that in the template rather than having multiple steps that go through this. So I guess my thinking is that I certainly am not trying to supplant something he's done, and it could be that our work would just end up in there or in a repository that is kind of tangential to it, but they're symbiotic or something. So I haven't thought through that too much. I don't know if you thought about it at all, Konstantin, but my intention is not to kind of run roughshod over Leo's work or anything like that, because it looks like a really nice package. It's really well documented. It works quite cleanly, although actually at the moment it's not building on the Bioconductor build system, so I'm not sure what that says, but it's got 3 red X's next to it at the moment on their system. So there's some dependency that's not working quite right.
Yeah, speaking of discrepancy, because it seems to be working fine on 3 out of 4 runners on GitHub, or 2 out of 3 anyway. But yeah, okay, that's definitely motivating some further discussion between all of us. And if and when we post that onto the BioC challenge, I think people interested in GitHub Action are more than welcome to join the effort. Because again, I think in my experience, the best way to get familiar with them is to dive just right in there, get someone else's workflow, and read it to understand what it's doing. There is one more question I arrived in the meantime from Felix Ernst. How do you think about installation of system requirements? It doesn't have the raised hand. Is that enough?
Well, I know that the RStudio people are thinking about this as well. So I think, well, you can declare system dependencies in the description file, but this is, I think, was kind of a free form, but is now more formally enforced, as far as understood. And I think they are having, well, because this applies to all our packages, not just Bioconductor specific ones, that they are developing the packages and the tools to be able to install those across platforms consistently. And I guess, well, because Bioconductor is a smaller community of the whole, as a subset of the whole R community, would probably want to piggyback on those and don't develop our own solutions to those system requirements things.
Yeah, there is a function in one of the many developer-centric tools from RStudio. I can't remember if it's in DevTools or Use This, or maybe it's in Remotes, but that will at least claims to know which system dependencies. You run it on the current working directory or the top level of your package or something, and it claims to come back with the list. I think I've used it in one workflow and it worked. It installed, I guess it was probably libxml and libcurl, because you always need them. But I can't remember exactly which function it is. If I find a link to it, I'll post it somewhere. Because for that one example, so n of 1, it worked fine for me. But I suspect there's a lot of edge cases. But that at least takes a little bit of the work out, and I hope that is also a kind of cross-platform approach. So it does it, whether it knows what to look for if you're doing that on a Mac versus doing it on a Linux machine or something. Otherwise, you end up with 3 steps installing the appropriate system dependencies depending upon the runner operating system, which just makes it makes it harder to maintain, I suppose, because you have lots of different steps that get run under different situations.
Yeah, so I've just sent a link in the feed. I think that's the one that you meant, sysrex, or the sysrec command, although, yeah. So that's typically one that I stole from someone else, probably Sean Davey, who have linked the Build a Workshop repository, which is usually my go-to reference whenever I have a doubt. Or if something breaks in mine, I just go back to his. Okay, so do we have... I always have
there was a question by Jonas Spoon, I think. Is there something for CNN process training in Bioconductor? And I guess CNN means convolutional neural network, or what is CNN short for? Or is it something, because this is the only abbreviation that yes. Okay. I think there were some efforts. So this is now, I guess, quite tangential to our main topic. But as a quick answer, I think there were some efforts by RStudio to port the Keras API to R. So Keras is one of the popular neural network libraries in Python. But I've never worked with this, so not the right person to answer this.
All right, don't hesitate to raise hand, right? I mean, we're slightly over time, so, but happy to, oh, there we go. Keras Studio. Sorry, I'm not, I mean, I know Keras generally, but...
Yeah, I guess that's the port, so the link to the RStudio R interface to Keras, which I guess, so I've used Keras from Python, and it's a great library, it's a beautiful API. I've not used the port to R. And it's also a few years ago that I actually used it.
Yeah, if people want to clarify their question verbally, that's, I mean, we do have the microphone for that. Otherwise, might just close the session, except if someone wants to have, Mike or Konstantin, if you want any closing notes and and summary or looking forward. But
I guess I'd like to thank everybody for coming, spending an hour a bit over an hour discussing this with us. It's been interesting. It's been good to hear a bit of validation that other people struggle with these things, but also that people want to use them and investigate them and things. I guess we'll try and at least kind of sketch out some thoughts from this and some points that we might want to try and address, probably in Kevin's challenge framework kind of thing. In the next couple of days, we'll try and do that. So whilst the conference is still running. And then if you are interested in joining us or have some other ideas and things, we can try and explore that in either the Slack channel or in one of the breakout sessions, or what do we call them here? They're like the tables in the lounge or something. But yeah, there are many options for us to kind of have slightly smaller discussions where everybody can have their mics on and videos on and kind of thing. So hopefully we'll try and get that done in the next couple of days, and we'll maybe get something by the end of this week where if people are interested, approach us and we can work something out. It'd be really cool. But yeah, if not, thanks for listening anyway.
Exactly. So thanks to you guys for presenting the topic. So that was really interesting discussion, and I hope people who didn't know that much about GitHub Action got a feeling for what it can do and how it can be used, and people who already have some experience probably could have some further insights. Please do carry on the discussion. So you do have tables in the lounge. I think it's up to 8 people at a time at a single table on this Airmeet platform. We can always try to arrange maybe there's an arena where we can have booths about particular topics. If that can help, but at the moment I think the lounge table would be the go-to place. And obviously there's the Bioconductor Slack channel where I don't know if there's a dedicated channel for that yet, possibly not. So if there is some interest and enough people to motivate that, we could carry on beyond the conference on the Bioconductor Slack channel. And with that, thank you everyone for staying more than an hour. We'll close today and see you tomorrow, starting from 2 Central European time. But obviously, we mentioned as well that the Airmeet platform is open 24/7 for the duration of the conference. So if people want to congregate before tomorrow morning, time zone dependent, and grab a table and talk together, it's all there for you. Thank you very much.